In this lesson, we're going to look a little bit at Ruby network programming. We're going to take a very simplified approach to network programming and just look at one protocol, TCP. So we're going to write what often is called a very simple socket client and a socket server. And in the exercises, we'll elaborate on our client and our server just a little bit. So let's get started. First thing we're going to do is write the client. So we're going to call this program client.rb. To write a TCP client, the first thing we need to do is require the socket library. So we'll write that line first. The next step is to designate a host and a port. We're going to work locally, so our host is going to be localhost, and the port can be any valid port number, probably very high. We're going to just pick one at random, 1500, and just make sure you don't pick a port that's reserved for something else. The next step then is to create a socket. We're going to call it sock. To do that, we call an object from the socket library, TCP socket, and we call the open method with our host and our port. The next step is to write a loop that will read lines coming in from the server and display them. This is a one-way socket. So our while loop says while line is equal to sock.getS. Then we chop the line and display it to our console, and then end the loop. When we're finished, we close our socket. And that's it for the client, so let's save this file. Then we're going to open a new file, and this is going to be our server file. The first step is to require the socket library. Then we create a server object by calling the open method of a TCP server object from the library with our port. And then we write a loop to wait for the client to connect. And we're going to write a message to the client. Then let's write another message to the client. Then let's close the connection. And then let's close it. And you'll notice we run that in a loop. So let's save the file. So now we have a client and a server. So the first thing we're going to do is run the server. And as you'll see, it's just sitting there waiting. So now we're going to open another command prompt window. Hang on while I get it into frame here. Then we're going to run our client. And so you'll see that when we connected to the server sent back hello client, and the server sent back goodbye client, and then it closed the connection. Let's review what we did here real quickly. We'll start with the server. For the server, we have to require the socket library. We open the port, connect, and then we wait. When we have a connection, we write out some data, and then we close. On the client side, we require the socket library. We open a socket, given a host name and a port number, and then we loop while there's data to get, and get the data and write it to the console. And then when we're finished, we close the socket. And that's all there is to it. So that's a very simple view of network programming in Ruby. Of course, there's a lot more detail that we can go into. And we are going to look in another chapter at one aspect of network programming, internet network programming. And we're going to cover that in a later chapter. But for now, we're going to move on to the exercises. And in one of the exercises, we're going to elaborate on this client-server demonstration.